Hello everybody out in all things Irish rock and roll. Today we're talking to Justin McCarthy, TV editor, composer, fantastic blues guitar player, a software developer, a general renaissance man who's based in Galway now. He's just fresh from his triumph of his musical, the Playboy of the Western World, which is just closed after a number of performances in the Royal Hospital in Kilmainham. A triumph. I've seen it twice. I think it's an incredible show. So Justin, we'd just like to talk to you about your experience in the Irish arts field over the last number of years, when you started out. So would you like to talk about how you started, what got you interested in music in the first place and the influences that you had?
Well, actually, the influence I had at the very start was I grew up in Raheny.
Yeah.
Right, and there were an awful lot of at the age of 14, there were lots of rock and roll bands.
Yeah.
Like Marty Whelan was in a band down the road.
Yeah.
He was a drummer. And there were a lot of kids all got into rock and roll at the same time. And it had this thing where, if you weren't playing football and you weren't a sports guy, rock and roll was the only other thing that attracted girls.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? So, and it was kind of cool. And then there was the Grove.
Yeah.
Like the Grove in Clontarf. And the Grove was like a hive because anybody who was young and kind of trying to do stuff went to the Grove. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So playing in a rock and roll band or even being associated with a rock and roll band made walking into the Grove really cool.
Yeah.
So that's where,
Yeah.
And we all say, like, there's quite a few guitarists I know, and all of us still insist that we were the people that inspired you too.
Yeah, very good. That's a great claim to fame right there.
Yeah, absolutely.
So what kind of music were you listening to, or did you want to play? What inspired you to take up the guitar in particular?
Cream.
Yeah.
Disraeli Gears to me was the absolute seminal album of the 60s. I became a big Beatles fan, but not until my 40s.
Yeah.
Until I started what they were doing. But I started like Disraeli Gears and Taste, Roy Gallagher's first band, Taste, on the boards.
Yeah.
The album on the boards. The two of those, to me, were totally extraordinary, particularly Disraeli Gears, which I always considered it's still underrated as one of the finest albums ever written. Because it was a complete mold breaker.
Yeah.
And the sophistication of it for what were three very young men.
Yes.
It was mind-boggling,
Yeah.
Extraordinary. But that sound,
yeah.
And
of course, it was the famous three-piece sound that every band
Absolutely.
in Ireland was a three-piece at that time after Rory Gallagher, the early Thin Lizzy, and of course listened to all those bands.
But particularly Cream, because they understood how the dynamics of it worked.
Yeah.
Their kind of their composition and their way of doing things and using the musical dynamics to make a three-piece sound really full.
Yeah.
Was an extraordinary achievement.
Yes.
Do you know?
Very good. So, I mean, you went to UCD then. And,
went to UCD.
What did you study in UCD?
Philosophy.
Philosophy.
Yeah.
Okay, pure philosophy.
Pure philosophy.
Very good. So, one of the big bands I remember you in the sort of the boom time of the 1980s was High Society.
Yeah.
How did that band come about, and what kind of success did you have?
Well, we started as myself and the bassist. We started, and then we found a drummer, and it wasn't really working because I'm no singer.
Yeah.
Do you know? And the bassist was no singer either.
Yeah.
And so we got a woman called Christine Sweetman, who was a photographer as well, and she just had a voice.
Yeah.
She had that voice that just sat inside the music and made it make sense.
Yeah.
Do you know? So and she also brought something else that I'll never forget. At the time, like my son who plays music as well refers to them as shoegazers.
Yeah.
Is that everybody play looking down at their feet.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? And Christine, a woman in a rock and roll band, always did one really interesting thing, which is that it suddenly became about performance.
Yeah.
Because there was somebody there going, look at me.
Yeah.
And it suddenly became about performance, and that was the thing that changed. She
good.
brought an idea and an image with us.
Yeah.
And so that went on for 2 or 3 years. We were signed to WEA in 1981.
Yeah.
1980, the end of 1980. We were signed to WEA, and that meant we got to do this. We were the support act for Paul Brady's first tour.
Yeah.
Hard Station, that tour, which was a big eye opener because it's the first time we actually got to tour around the country. Do you know what I mean? And it was 1981, and 1981 was a really interesting time because the reality of it was that beer companies didn't control music.
Yeah.
If you look at anywhere in the country now, right, the curators, up until the pandemic, the curators of all rock and roll in Ireland, unless you were a huge band, was either Heineken or Guinness or something like that. And they controlled it. They decided what music went on in the bars and who did it.
Yeah.
And consequently, most of the musicians that 40 years ago would have been writing their own stuff and attracting their own audience have now become covers bands.
Yes.
Because of the beer companies, which I think is outrageous. But,
yeah.
You know.
Well, that was a very heady time in Ireland because everybody who was in a band at that time wanted to be the new Rats, the new U2.
Yeah, well,
and there was a lot of A&R interest in Ireland. How did that work out for yourselves?
Well, it worked very well for us because the drummer knew sort of vaguely of one of these guys in Warner's, and he just left him a tape.
Yeah.
And the man came back and said, "Joe, we want you."
Yeah.
I mean, it was that simple. It was ridiculously simple. Like,
and were you signed to an album or singles?
No, we signed, I think it was 3 singles or something, but it didn't work.
Yeah.
The first recordings we did were the only recordings we did, and it didn't really work. It didn't connect. The singles didn't sell.
Yeah.
And then, as happens with all rock and roll bands at that age, you have put your heart and soul into it for 2 years, and you're so emotional about it that, you know.
Yes.
In your early 20s, you have no judgment.
Yeah.
Not really, you know.
Youth is wasted on the young, just.
Yeah, well, absolutely.
Well, listen, you had a parallel career sort of bubbling under there in film.
Yeah.
And how did that develop? And
well, what happened was that I think everybody I've ever talked to who went into music in their early 20s, the same thing happened. They were committed to one band, and it was a complete commitment of their life.
Yeah.
And then it broke up.
Yeah.
Right? And the sense of devastation and failure and disappointment is like nothing. It takes you years to actually build up to that again. Yeah. And I have always thought it was a combination of this really interesting thing where you can afford to spend 24 hours a day working on your rock and roll band.
Yeah.
Because you've no mortgage, you've no children, you've no...
Yeah.
You know, so you can be broke.
Yeah.
And spend all your time working in a rock and roll band, which everybody does. And then it fails, and you've absolutely nothing. And I was disgusted with myself, and I was disgusted with everything that happened. And I decided I'd look for a new career.
Yeah.
So I walked into... It was very peculiar, actually. I walked into an edit suite one day. I did an ankle course in how to get a job. You know?
Yeah.
And I walked into an edit suite one day, and I saw the pictures whizzing backwards and forwards because they were rewinding forward and rewinding the tape. And I got the shock of my life because I had been dreaming about that all my life.
Yeah.
I'd been dreaming about images moving backwards and forwards.
Yeah.
And I'd never been in an edit suite.
Yeah.
And it's one of those things, it's like when you climb to the top of a mountain.
Yeah.
It's just one of those seconds where I went, oh my God, I'm home.
Yeah.
And
really?
I never, from that moment on, when it came to television, it just, everything just worked, you know?
Yes.
It was very strange, but it was literally that thing, walking into a room going, oh, this is it. Do you know? So that took me from my early 20s to my 40s, really.
Very good. So how did that sort of morph into a career for you, you know, from that experience?
Simple, really. I learned how to be an editor.
Yeah.
Right. I got a job in car communications, and all I did was edit.
Yeah.
Because I'd realised very quickly that one of the things about television at that stage, which is not true anymore, was that you had to be absolutely specialised.
Yes.
I don't know, nobody took you seriously.
Yeah.
So I became an editor, and I was obsessed with it.
Yeah.
So all the energy that I'd had in rock and roll and all the commitment and all that, I just parked
Went
to one
in there.
side, and I just, like everything I could edit and everything I could do in television, I did.
Yeah.
And when you work that hard at something and you have the space in front of you to work that hard, it will usually work for you.
Very good.
You know?
Yeah.
So that's, that looked after me for an awful lot of my life then.
Right. So you developed your own production company. Then.
Yeah.
How did that go? This is a time before you actually moved to
Galway. Number 10 Post Productions it was called, and did a lot of television. But then, then the environment changed in broadcasting. I think it was Ray Burke.
Yeah.
Remember Ray Burke, the minister. Decided he was going to cap all RTÉ's earnings so that he could invest in TV3.
Yeah.
And the result of that was that the whole, if you were outside RTÉ and freelance or looking for commissions and all that sort of stuff, it all just nosedived because they had no money.
Yeah.
Because he hived off all the money.
Yeah.
And so the post-production industry actually collapsed. And I went with it.
Yeah.
Do you know?
Okay. So around that time, you made the incredibly brave move to up sticks and go to that fantastic city in the west, the home of the arts on the west coast, Galway. So can you tell us a little bit about what inspired that move and what it meant to you?
You see, I'd been working on a couple of TV series, and one of them was a thing called Purini at the time, which was an Irish language kind of travel thing around the country. And this stuff kept on coming up about mockness.
Yeah.
And I was mesmerised with this because they were not like anything I'd ever seen.
Yeah.
These people, they were completely rooted in the society. At the time, Paul Brannock came out with this extraordinary statement, which is like, you know, the right to march down the streets and make a show should not belong to the church and the trade unions. We have a right to be there as well.
Yeah.
And his whole thing was taking the streets.
Yeah.
And making public displays that challenged the whole status quo in society. And I just thought this was the most amazing thing I'd ever seen.
Yeah.
That, you know, they were standing there saying, no, you don't have the right to this. And nobody thought of it.
Yeah.
Nobody thought of it. They were going, actually, that's the way it is.
Yeah.
And suddenly these people come out with these glorious costumes and all this amazing tribal, like, because what they did, all the stuff was pagan.
Yeah.
Like pre-Christian pagan. And they were like pagans that had come back to take their space.
Yeah.
And it was thrilling.
Yes.
And the whole arts festival was wound up in that kind of culture, you know, where it was the community, the whole society performed.
Yes.
You know, and I mean, it was marginalised because you had your kind of, you know, you had the people who really didn't like the arts and they kind of interfered with the build-up to the races and stuff like that. You know? But then you had this extraordinary culture. Yeah. And that mesmerised me like nothing I'd ever seen. Yeah. You know, and I got completely swept up in that.
Right. I suppose it's, you know, rock and roll meets the world of theatre. I remember the Druid Company were incredibly active. The whole of Galway was sort of mesmerised by what was going on there. So how did the skills that you brought with you to Galway help you settle in into that community?
Well, I came down and decided I was making a documentary in the Arts Festival.
Yeah. Right,
which RT said they might commission.
Yeah.
But they, so I managed to talk one of the local companies into supporting me.
Yeah.
And so we filmed for 2 weeks, and I started editing it, and we did all that. And then RT said, no, we're not going to take the documentary, right? Yeah. And then by an extraordinary coincidence, the government collapsed, and Michael D was made. Yeah. Michael D was made
a big champion of the arts.
A big champion of the arts, and became First Minister for Arts and Culture. Yeah. And the Arts Festival people were really streetwise. Yeah. And what they did was they, I finished the documentary anyway. Yeah. And they decided we'd have a launch, regardless of whether the RT had commissioned it or not. And Michael D had just become Minister for the Arts, which meant he was also Minister for Broadcasting. Yeah. So the first public engagement he had was to launch the film.
In his own hometown.
In his own hometown. And the RT management, of course, were left with absolutely no choice but to say, oh no, we have to take this film. Yeah, there was a very, a lot of the RT management went, oh God, watch these guys. You know what I mean? Because that completely marginalised them. You know?
Which put you on the map then locally as well.
Yeah.
So how did that develop then in terms of...
Well, the big change at that point was that I got a couple of other documentaries and stuff like that, but then T.G. Carr happened. Yeah. And T.G. Carr was extraordinary because T.G. Carr had a lot of money. By relative to a lot of broadcasters, it wasn't a lot of money, but they had a lot of money. Yeah. And they wanted everybody who was new. Yes. They didn't want the safe, the old. They wanted everything to be different. They wanted everything to be new. Yeah. And so they were actively looking for people who didn't conform to the status quo. Yeah. And then there was a wonderful few years where everybody was going, oh no, we could try this, or we could try this. Yeah. And they'd go, yeah, keep it coming, you know. Yeah, yeah. And it was wonderful because the West of Ireland changed completely. Yeah. Because of T.G. Carr and because of this thing, that a huge amount of, like, still, I live in Spiddle, and the biggest employer in Spiddle is television. Yeah. Right? Yeah. Which is an extraordinary thing, a small village. And
well, Gaeilge got...
No, tá beag an Gaeilge go.
They didn't teach you much Irish in St. Paul's or Raheny.
No.
Okay, so let's move it on a bit. Your sort of return to the boards, to taste with the music, returns to the blues. How did that come about? Was that something that you just saw, the opportunity?
No.
Tell us a little bit about the whole songwriting process for you.
Well, I was always obsessed with songwriting, but it wasn't until, for some reason, when my first son was born. Yeah. Then something happened in my head that went, I can go back to this.
This is 1999.
Yeah. Once he was born, I kind of, part of me went, I can go back to this now. Yeah. I have no idea how that works or what that is, but I could go back to this and I could go back to music again. Yeah. And I don't know why. Yeah. But I was obsessed with, there's lots of stuff I was obsessed with. And one of the things I spent about 2 years trying to do was rewrite Shakespeare's sonnets as songs. Yeah. Do you know?
It was a big audience for that.
Well, actually, no, because the songs didn't work. Yeah. And it wasn't until one of the biggest influences to me is there's a New York songwriter. He wrote all Frank Sinatra's lyrics called Sammy Cahn.
Yeah,
Right?
famous
And
ones, yeah.
Sammy Cahn had this wonderful introduction to it. He's a rhyming dictionary, which I use all the time.
Yeah.
It's brilliant.
Yeah.
But he had this really interesting introduction to what songwriting was, as far as he was concerned.
Yeah.
And this is something he'd been doing all his life.
Yes.
Right? And in it he went, people say, oh, you're a great writer, which means you can write a poem or you can write a song.
Yeah.
He said, it's simply not like that.
Yeah.
And people say to me, what's the difference between a poem and a song? It's really simple. Did you ever try and sing a poem?
Yeah.
And I'd always been obsessed with songwriting, but even all the stuff I tried, none of it worked, but I got so interested
Yeah.
that, there's something there I just couldn't let go of.
His lyrics were very special. He could tell a story in one line, Sammy Cahn.
Well, there's a great story in his introduction where he talks about, people say, what's the most important thing about a song? He says, I'd always say the phone call. And he just described this thing where he says, Frank Sinatra, rang me and says, and that was 1956, and he says, Frank, I says, Sammy, Frank says, write me a song about planes, because package holiday is a big thing.
Yeah.
So come fly with me.
Yeah.
Was Sinatra saying, write me a song about it?
Yeah, incredible, isn't it?
And you think the sophistication of the fantasy in that as a song.
Yeah.
And it was Sinatra saying, write me a song about planes, package holidays are big, we can't lose.
Yeah. And songs about eternal sort of songs that last forever, they're incredible. So speaking of things that last forever, the legend of the Playboy of the Western world, what was it that grabbed you about the play that inspired you to put those songwriting talents to work?
Well, when it started by trying to do things like Shakespeare's really hard because actually, even though it's beautifully written, it's quite turgid.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? And you don't have that kind of meter.
Yeah.
That songs demand, right?
Yeah.
But I was looking at the Playboy, and somebody had said, "Justin, look at this. If you want, look at this." And so I started to read it, and Singh was a musician.
Yeah.
Right, and you could see in the way the lyrics worked that actually, what I realized just looking through the lyrics is saying, this is actually country and western.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? This is country and western. Like the whole story of the Playboy is a lost weekend in the bar.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Yeah. And all the characters that you get in every country song are in there.
Yeah.
Now, and I thought, that means that you only have to take his lyrics and make them rhyme a little bit, and it'll all just fall into place. And that's exactly what happened. I mean, I'd love to say, oh, this was a really smart thing on my part, but actually, what happened was it was there to be made, rather than it being a big idea. Do you know?
And still you have the vision to see it. When I was at the musical, I was thinking about describing it as like Grease meets B.B. King. There's a sort of a, and I hear lots of influence in songwriting. There's Bob Dylan, and there's a whole lot of other things. So, when you were, what approach did you take then to developing pieces of music for different parts of the action?
Okay, well, what happened was that the script is an adaptation.
Yeah.
But what happened was I wrote the songs first.
Yeah. Oh, very good.
Right, so the songs were actually like a concept album.
Yeah. Yes.
That we then wrote and adapted the play around.
Yeah.
Because what that did was that gave them a kind of a presence.
Yeah.
And my idea from the very start had been that it would go through lots of different styles of popular music because each style of music could be a character.
Yeah.
Do you know? Now, what happened, which is always what happens with bands, is as the band get more and more like a band, the styles of music become more homogenous.
Yeah.
Do you know? But it was done the other way around. The songs were written first, and then the thing was adapted. You know.
So one of your catchwords, Justin, you were saying earlier on, is that anything good takes time.
Yes.
A lot of time.
A lot of time.
So what was the gestation period like then? From getting the idea, you had songs written. Now you've got to get actors, you've got to get a script. A script.
Yeah.
You've got to get it. What challenges did you face along the way?
Well, the first one was nobody believed me.
Yeah.
And not for the first time in my life, I hate to say it, but nobody believed me. I'd sent out demos to people like, oh, Justin, oh no, please, you're my friend and I don't want to insult you, but honest to God, and there was all that first, and then we kept on working at it, myself and a guy called Dermot Fuicha, who was a very good writer, and we kept on working at it, and because I'd spent so long in television, one of the things you learn in television is how to fund things. Yeah. Right? And you learn all sorts of really clever ways of doing this. And the BAI, which is the Broadcasting Association of Ireland, I had heard had if you tried to get funded for television, it was really hard.
Yeah.
Right? But but they had another budget for radio drama,
Yeah.
which was never oversubscribed.
Oh, really?
So
Yeah.
we applied for that, and
Yeah.
I went into Kevin Reynolds in RTE and I said, I have this idea for radio drama. And he listened to the songs and he loved them.
Yeah, yeah.
Right? So I had somebody
Yeah.
on side. So what happened was that us and RTE pitched it to the BAI and they said yes.
Yes.
And so we made a radio drama
Yeah.
of the thing with the songs in it.
Yeah.
Right? But the process of making the radio drama, I spent a couple of days in the studio watching all these actors doing their sound effects and stuff.
Yeah.
This is theatre. This is,
Yeah,
and it gave it a device. It meant
Yeah.
that the thing could work in lots of different layers at the same time,
yeah.
rather than trying to get actors to be the characters.
Yeah.
They could be radio actors and not necessarily.
So that was the
characters.
inspiration for staging it as a live radio.
Because we actually took a lot of what
broadcast.
happened in the studio and said, no,
Yeah,
we just did that with it.
and it works incredibly. I must say, it's an incredible show, unbelievable cast, acting, and the singers. Those people, your cast are incredible singers. A lot of rock and roll sort of talent in there as well.
Yeah.
Where are you from, Mr. Honey?
Honey,
Funny, I've not seen your face before. Rest a while here, Mr. Honey.
honey,
We don't turn strangers from our door. Did the bailiffs and the peelers and the broken harvest see to you? Did you run away and soldier with the boar? Was it burglary, a butchery, a bigamy that drove you here? Well, tell us more.
Not a soul around. Just this beautiful girl singing to an empty bar.
6 yards of stuff for to make a yellow gown. Lace boots and long heels sent down from the town. A hat for a wedding, a fine-toothed comb, and barrels of porter for Jim Farrell's home.
Have you heard about the Stooks from Dublin on the Liverpool boat? Made a show with people who once walked the world. White skulls and black ones, yellows and grey. Some skulls with full teeth and some with only one.
That's when the Stooks come crawling.
When the Stooks come crawling,
The Stooks come crawling.
when the Stooks come crawling,
When the Stooks come crawling.
Crawling, crawling, crawling around, around, around. On a shiny Sunday morning, we'd swing with the dead. Some bones, well, you just have to die for. A fibula, a tibula, a femur or two. Some bones, well, you just have to die for.
That's when the Stooks come crawling.
when the Stooks come crawling,
The Stooks come crawling.
when the Stooks come crawling,
When the Stooks come crawling.
Crawling, crawling, crawling around, around, around.
So to get it to the success that it is there now, I mean, you're doing a sort of an Irish tour. The radio show won a prize.
It was won a silver in the. There's a New York Radio Awards every year.
Yeah.
And it won a silver in that, which gave it a bit of credibility. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that helped considerably.
Yeah.
You know.
So the whole COVID thing, which is, I mean, it has an incredible impact on the arts and music. We've never ever seen anything like this. It's just destroyed the business. How did you cope with that? How did you bring the show through all that process and keep it together?
Myself and the producers realised something really important, which was that, firstly, they're a production company who, the people who run it, the phrase they would use is never waste a crisis.
Yeah.
Never waste a crisis.
Yeah.
And they had realised very early on that if you used a stretch tent,
Yeah.
the stretch tent was legally the same as outdoors.
Yes.
That was the first thing. So you could, like we did it last summer, you could get up to 150 people. At the moment it's 200, but we left it at 100. You could get 100 people into a space.
Yeah.
Right? Now, Druid and the Abbey had both tried doing stuff outdoors.
Yeah.
But in every case, the problem was there was no theatrical device that allowed them to use microphones.
Right. Okay.
Okay. Whereas we were saying this is a radio drama, so we could
It's
throw out
perfect for
microphones.
it. Yes.
It was made for it.
Yeah.
Right.
Incredible.
So we were left with this thing where there was no compromise in our show by doing it in a tent, and we just added on to that if it was the 50s, it would be a theatrical fit.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Like the 50s. So we just played that right down because it all just fell into place.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? It became what it is because everything was just like it just fell into place bit by bit. You know.
You have an incredible cast. And the band, you're playing live on stage, back into songs. There's a guy from the Stunning in the band.
Yeah, the drummer.
Yeah.
Cormac Dunn.
Yeah.
Is from the Stunning.
Yeah.
And but you see, the thing is that, like this, the band have switched a bit, but the iteration I have at the moment, I think, is the best.
Yeah.
But one of the things that's happened is that, as I was saying to you earlier, all the musicians, particularly in the west of Ireland, all ended up playing in covers bands.
Yeah.
Whereas that's not where they belong, and that's not what the level of their talent either.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you find that right across the board. So actually finding musicians who could do the kind of thing I needed done was very easy.
Yeah.
Do you know?
Because of incredible talent.
Because there's a lot of talent there.
Yeah. Okay, so where to now with the Playboy, or have you other projects that are also bubbling under?
Well, I've there's a few things I've tried, but I remember reading about what's the name, the big musical producers in the States, the 1950s, Rodgers and Hammerstein.
Yeah.
Right. And one of the things that I was flabbergasted about Rodgers and Hammerstein wasn't how many successes they had, but how many failures they had.
Right, yeah.
Right? There were 7 musicals, I think, after Oklahoma, all of which bombed.
Really?
Do you know what I mean? When you think about that, people go, you know, now I don't particularly like their kind of musicals, but you know, you have to respect what they were doing, you know.
Yeah.
But 7 of them nosedived, never got more than a week.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And the thing that fascinated me was the sheer tenacity and the ability to say, no, that's not working. We have to do something else.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, and so I've had a couple of spectacular failures since I started the Playboy with other ones. But I have another. I'm actually looking at fairy stories at the moment because there's a whole world there with mythologies and fairy stories, which I think would make a stunning musical.
Yeah. Well, just briefly, just talk about the musical influences in the compositions that you have in this show. Because the music is quite unique. Most musicals are in the sort of pop. Very few, they border on rock stuff, but yours is very, very rocky, very bluesy. And so what influenced you in terms of writing the songs like that?
An awful lot of Dylan.
Yeah.
An awful lot of Dylan, and particularly like Oh Mercy and Time Out of Mind.
Yeah.
Which to me would be the huge sense. And that whole Daniel Lanois sound.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. That's the first thing, is that because it has such a clear, integral thing about it.
Yeah.
That, you know, and it has this thing, to my mind, is that one of the fascinating things about a lot of his production is that it instantly sounds beautiful.
Yeah.
It instantly opens up this world that's full of emotion and beauty
Yeah.
And that Oh Mercy and Time Out of Mind, particularly Time Out of Mind, which I
Yeah.
consider probably one of
Yeah.
Dylan's finest albums, that was a huge influence on it.
Very good. Yeah.
And then being able to go anywhere with that.
Yeah.
Because of the way his production sound kind of worked, you could go from sevenths and diminished chords to major sevenths quite easily.
Yes.
And still not sound like you were going into that dodgy kind of awful cheesy pop thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because if you'd established the sound first, you could go to all sorts of places that you normally couldn't.
Yeah.
Do you know? So that was actually the biggest influence.
Well, there's quite a range of subtleties in the music when you consider that the three-piece, you know, a Gretsch guitar, your own Gibson, drums and bass. It's very, very simple.
Yeah.
And a lot of the music is actually really, really subtle and sort of creeps up on you. But then it sort of explodes as well, because you've got the rockier and the bluesier end of it as well. So your future music, will say, you go to continue with that?
That model, yeah. I'd like to, well, what I want to try and do, the next thing I'm looking at, what I want to try and do is see if I can bring some like classically trained opera singers into some of the stuff. I really, to me, the holy grail in all of this is to actually get to the point where you can take well thought out rock and roll and take your kind of great opera singers and get it to work in some way that doesn't sound like a really cheesy musical.
Yeah, yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
I still have this thing where I want to hear a tenor sing the blues.
Yeah, yeah.
Do you know what I mean? And make it work. And I don't know how to make that work yet. But that's where, and I have a lot of ideas around that. But it's that kind of trying to merge things that people would normally go, you can't do that.
Yeah.
Do you know?
Yeah.
Like, because, with the Playboy, lots of people said, you can't do that.
Yeah.
You can't. I mean, one of the most fascinating things, and it's a real lesson for me, was that I sent the demos to loads of people. I was saying to you, they'd say, Justin, that's dreadful.
Yeah.
Right? And then they'd come and see the show.
Yeah.
And they go, what do you do to the music?
Yeah.
What do you do to the music? It's amazing.
Yeah.
And I'd go, thanks. Because I couldn't say to them, actually, the songs are exactly the same. That's not what happened here.
Yeah.
What happened is that I
We
switched
see the context, yes. Yeah.
And that was made it work.
Well, listen, the show is a fantastic success. You're currently in the middle of an Irish tour with it. And any further plans for that? Anything in the pipeline, or are you just waiting to see?
I'm waiting to see what comes back.
Yeah.
Like the point about it is that this time around we were funded by the Department of Arts.
Yeah.
Right. Because it's 25 people involved.
Yeah.
So it's you can't put it on and just hope to make it back on box office, which is what we had done up to now.
Yeah.
And an awful lot of goodwill. You know what I mean? But that runs out.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
And we're waiting to see if it goes further and if people pick up on it.
Very good.
Do you know? Because it's the first time we've managed to take it out of Galway.
Okay. Well, listen, I think it's a resounding success. It's an incredible mixture of where rock meets the art world, the world of drama. Two classic sort of influences there. A question we always ask people at the end, Justin, is looking back at the music and your career there, which is still a very active career. Do you have any regrets that stand out for you?
Not really, no. But I don't think it works like that. That's the thing. I think one of the really interesting things about music is it kind of defines. It takes its own thing.
Yeah.
You know, like that. Most of the time, what happens to you is not really within your control.
Yeah.
You know, I'd love to say I could sit down on a Monday morning and write a great song. I can't.
Yeah.
I have no idea how that happens.
Yeah.
I'll sit there for days and days and suddenly, there it is.
Yeah.
Or not. It depends. You don't know.
Yeah.
And so regrets are not something that it's like the weather. It's going to happen, but you don't know how.
Yeah.
You know? And so no, I have to say no, I've never. I absolutely not.
Yeah. Well, listen, thank you so much for taking
you.
the time out to talk to all things Irish and rock and roll. And ladies and gentlemen, Justin McCarthy, film producer, composer, bluesman, a great man behind the Gibson guitar.